I'm Matt Miller.
And I'm Hannah Elliott, and this is Hot Pursuit.
All right, so we have both been excited to talk to Tom Wagner of Knighthead Capital for a while now. So he's agreed to come in and talk to us. Let's get straight into it. I want to just first off say we both listened to Barry Ritholtz's podcast, and we loved it. And I always love Barry's podcast, but Hannah, you're the one who turned me on to the Tom Wagner episode, and it was great, right?
It was really good. It was very far-reaching, and I think it really set a good platform for where we can jump off of. So anyone listening, go listen to the Barry podcast if you want to hear about more of the financial side and sports teams and Tom Brady and
all kinds of good stuff.
And those things, because we're going to focus on cars, really, for these purposes.
So let's start with your company is Knighthead Capital, and you make investments in a lot of different assets, but it's not, is it still like the distressed debt thing where you kind of cut your teeth?
We do a lot of distressed investing, which I would characterize as maybe not distressed as in the purest form anymore. We invest in businesses that are going through transitions. Sometimes that's a turnaround, maybe operationally, maybe financially, maybe strategically. And we try to find places to deploy capital where our capital and our expertise can make a difference. And we've found some interesting investments in the automobile/mobility space, broadly defined, where we believe we can make a positive impact.
So Revology and Singer we've talked about. Hertz, I think, is a famous one. And then you have a WEC racing team, right?
Yeah.
Yoda.
Yep.
Are those the big automotive investments that you have?
Those are certainly the biggest. There are a few other small, more venture type things that we don't really talk about. And by small, I mean really tiny dollars, but where we think that they are strategically important to us. And then others that are adjacent to those businesses where we think we can bolt them on and grow the existing investments that we have. But those four that you mentioned have a common thread. We have a view that mobility is going to move with increasing speed towards electrification because economically and for other reasons, socially, environmentally, it makes the most sense. We were a bit early in Hertz, but the thesis that led us to make that decision to purchase EVs is intact. If you hold the cars for a long enough period of time, the ROEs are much better than ICEs, and there are lots of other advantages there. But the fundamental reality is that with most EVs, they don't inspire the same kind of passion that certain other vehicles do. And we felt that as people move towards electric vehicles as the choice of transportation to get from point A to point B, there would be a rise in interest in vehicles that inspire great passion. Because people would use the EVs as kind of their mode of transportation, low cost, high tech. I mean, Teslas, are a great example of that. They're fantastic vehicles in getting you from A to B very, very safely, very, very economically. But on the weekend, maybe you want to go out and have a different experience. Let's call it digital versus analog. The analog experience for those who are car nuts, I think like the three of us and probably most of your listeners, involves more than getting from point A to point B. It's the feel, it's the smell, it's the sound, the vibration, the skill required to move some of these vehicles with some level of speed and safety. And we thought that would continue, and that has happened. There's been a massive rise. Now, that rise, we had a big blip post-COVID. And the day of reckoning is now upon us when demand has kind of come back to earth a little bit, and that's going to cause a big shakeout. But I think the long-term trend continues to rise upward, and we're going to see more and more interest in these really, really high-quality, non-EV, ICE restored vehicles, reimagined vehicles. That whole sector is going to continue to explode.
Can you talk a little bit about Singer in particular and what characteristics you saw in that company that made you know we really have some potential specifically with Singer?
Yeah, I think when we made the investment, we looked at it and said, is this something that's difficult to replicate? And I think as much as, well, there's lots of people that restore Porsches. There's lots of people that restore cars. There's nobody that restores them like Singer. And that's why if you look at every vehicle seller and reseller globally, if you look at all of them, lump them all together, Singer's number 2 in average selling price behind only Bugatti.
Wow.
Once you get beyond, say, 10 units, 20 units a year. And Singer's, in the vicinity of 200 vehicles per year. And that's
By the way, that's amazing because Bugatti makes the car from scratch. They do it all. Singer takes another vehicle and then modifies it, and they still get the second highest asking price.
Yeah, it's a reimagination of an existing Porsche 964, which is the vehicle upon which Singer performs its services on behalf of its customers. That reimagination process is everything other than what I'd characterize as the body in white or the frame. So you maintain the frame, and everything else is kind of upgraded to the specifications of the customer, and the level of specialization or customization is mind-boggling. There are no two Singers that are even close to being the same. And you've got to be a real nerd to notice the differences, but I think if Hannah, stepped into her car, she'd be like, "Oh my gosh, look at this one! This is good." The restored.
She's not
house
a nerd, Hannah. You're not a nerd.
Car nerd, which we all know is very cool.
I take it as a badge of honor.
Yeah, it should be. But you're like, "Oh, this is a houndstooth seat that references this model." Right, exactly. And if you look at the ducktail spoiler on the Singer DLS, which is sort of their ultra rare, incredible vehicles, you'd say, "Oh, well, that draws some comparisons to a 73 RS." So there's lots of references to older Porsches that bits and pieces that the customer says, "Well, I'd like to have that in my car." And I think what makes Singer special is that they do it with an enormous amount of love for the brand of Porsche and an enormous amount of respect for the customer and what they want. It's not just about slapping something together and saying, "Here, let's make it work." Most of these companies that perform this service don't actually make money.
But you want to make money with that investment, right?
Yeah, we can. The challenge is getting to scale.
That's what I was going to ask about, because hasn't Singer paused production of the 964, and we're sort of waiting for a 930 turbo, and the DLS we're also waiting for. So, are those pauses changing how you're looking at the company?
By the way, can I just brief pause? I don't know nearly as much about Singer as the two of you.
Yeah.
So while we're asking Tom questions, let's also explain to me, what is the DLS?
Okay,
what is that?
All the vehicles that Singer offers restoration services on are based on the Porsche 964, which was manufactured between 89 and 94. And each of the vehicles references an older Porsche, different variants. And so the Classic was the car that was best known for Singer, and their customers. We're coming towards the end of that run. I think in the next 18 months or so, those will all be produced. The car that references the 930 Turbo, which is currently characterized as the Classic Turbo, that vehicle is in production and deliveries have just started. So Hannah, I will.
Oh, good.
I will drive mine at Goodwood in July. Thankfully.
Are you going up the hill?
No, I don't have my FIA license, so I won't be allowed to drive up the hill. I know, but I'll drive it on the circuit on the Monday. So that'll
but
that's the Steve McQueen, the Widowmaker, right?
It's a Widow. It was. This is
only for those who don't know how to drive.
Exactly. You got to wait for that boost. This is a modern version. Boost comes on more quickly. It's a really very special car. Modern traction control and ABS, and some things that you can turn on or off that allow the vehicle to be driven on wet roads by an inexperienced driver with relative safety. Within the bounds of physics. We haven't yet invented a car that can overcome the laws of physics. But then there's the DLS Turbo, which is probably a few months away from having its first drivable prototype in the hands of journalists, and then some other cars in the queue that will be unveiled in the next year or two. But the 4 cars that I mentioned, including DLS, which is a full run that's been fully delivered and is out, those 4 cars will take us through the next couple of years and beyond. I think the waiting list is still in the vicinity of 3.5 years.
So basically you're saying, look, the model that you saw when you got involved with the company remains the same.
Yeah.
Your goal, your intent
That's
is
right.
the same.
It's it's to produce something that is beyond reproach as it relates to the quality. These have to be super reliable cars. So I have a DLS that I drove from London to Le Mans for race weekend. That's a long drive, sometimes at relatively rapid pace. And it's a flawless experience. I mean, these are cars that you can sit in for 6 hours and have.
I see here on the internet, DLS is for Dynamics and Lightweighting Study.
That's right.
And it's the one I've seen these on social media with the ridiculously wide haunches.
Yes.
And
yeah,
okay.
This one's even wider. The one you're
Some
looking at is a
people
DLS
like those,
Turbo.
Matt.
I just don't know enough about this. And in the world of Porsche, there's so much to know. And there's so many acronyms that I sometimes feel like I can't keep up.
You can go way down the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
I'm curious, you mentioned what's next for Singer, and I don't expect you to actually say, but is there any room to go the way of a roof where Singer would actually build their own cars versus reimagining?
That's a great question. I think the brand would allow Singer to pursue just about anything it wanted to do. I think, for the time being, the company is really very focused on executing as best it can on the strategy of reimagining Porsches on behalf of its customers, and that's a great business. There's a long pipeline of things that can be done, vehicles that can be reimagined that I think would be welcomed by all Porsche enthusiasts. And I think the company knows that not everyone wants a reimagined car. Some are the purists. They want the 73 RS exactly as it was. Others may say, well, no, I'd like to see a different version of that car. What could be done if you modernize it? And I think there's plenty to do just with that. And our capital was intended to help the company get to a place where its production could support the fixed costs in the business that are necessary to create vehicles of this quality and with these kinds of finishes. And
I was wondering about that. How did you get involved, and what kind of investment do you have in Singer?
Yeah, well, we were asked to refinance a facility that they had in place from a lender, and did that and provided some other working capital facilities and allowed them to just take the capital, in the most efficient form possible, while allowing Rob, the founder, and Maz, the CEO, to really direct the strategy of the business. They've got a spectacular team of key executives there, and some fantastic engineers. The craftsmen are unbelievable. I've been to a lot of really high-end vehicle manufacturing facilities, and Singer's, when you look at the finishes, you look at the body work, you look at the paint, it's as good as anybody out there.
Oh, they're gorgeous.
And by the way, you're starting, with a company as your reference, and Porsche, I think, does it as well or better than anyone. If you look at the tolerances in Porsche panels, as compared to some other very, very high-end automobile companies, it's really hard to get into where Porsche is.
They're pretty good build quality.
Very good build
out of
quality.
Stuttgart.
Yeah.
But how did they know to ask you? I mean, were you already into Porsches?
No. I mean, was I into Porsches? Yeah. I mean, I loved cars, but I grew up not being able to afford any. My first car was a 78 Corolla SR5 hatchback that was
nice.
That was
manual
rusted,
transmission.
Of course, yeah, rusting away.
How much did you pay for that car?
Zero, because my dad said if you can get it running, you can drive it. And so I quickly learned how to overhaul an engine and do brakes and a series of other things in the driveway. Not the safest thing in the world. Like in the old days without jack stands, not smart.
But I bet you still love driving it.
Oh, yeah, I don't have it anymore.
No, I mean
fell apart
loved.
A long time ago.
Past tense.
Absolutely, yeah.
Like at the time, a Corolla with a stick was awesome.
Just taught myself how to drive a stick on it, and But I think when you have those experiences, you fall in love with cars, and you imagine that it's not the slowest thing on the road, and you imagine that it doesn't have rust through the door panels. But as you get older and into life, hopefully you can afford something better. And the weird thing is, 2 weeks before the Porsche investment became available, our partner in the Hertz investments, a firm called Certaris, and one of the founders there is a guy named Greg O'Hara. And, we were just talking, and he's like, is there anything you always wanted but you wouldn't let yourself buy? I'm like, yeah, there's this one car. And he's like, yeah, me too. And he's like, he said, my thing's a Singer. I'm like, oh my God, that's mine as well. And he's like, why don't you have one? I'm like, because I just can't let myself do it. It's too special, right? It's always that thing I held on a platform. And so literally 2 weeks later, totally unrelated, I get in a meeting or having a barbecue with somebody, and he says, oh, you must be looking at Singer, given your view on vehicles and this kind of digital versus analog world. And I said, no, there's no way Singer needs any financial assistance. They got a multi-year backlog. And he's like, no, they're looking for some capital. And so we got connected to the lawyer that was representing him, and one thing led to another. And what's nice about that is we've learned a ton about the space and the industry, and I think that we've been able to add value in helping the company to think strategically. And what I would say is that I think singers now have a view that, maybe it's a little bit more of a luxury brand than what we originally thought. And with all things luxury, the goal is sell less for more. So let's not push the sales higher. Let's push sales, target sales units lower, maybe get a little bit additional price, but make it more exclusive. And I think, that's
I hate that.
I love it. I love it.
One time,
I love it.
Keanu Reeves makes these arch motorcycles.
Of course.
And I ran into him at
makes a loose term, but yes.
Ducati world premiere in Milan a few years ago, and he was talking to the CEO, and I kind of barged in their conversation. He was saying they're making another version, and the one they sell is already like $75,000.
Yeah.
I can't really justify that. So I was like, "Oh, cool. Are you going to make one that's cheaper?" And he said, "No. It's going to cost twice the price." And I was like, "Damn, I'm priced out already."
I know.
Well, that is interesting, because I was going to ask if you considered Singer to be a luxury asset.
For sure.
And do you value that differently than like an infrastructure asset, for instance?
So infrastructure, in a reasonably low rate environment like the one we're in now, it's not as low as it was, but infrastructure assets command high multiples if the durability of earnings is very stable. But if we say let's compare it to another manufacturing business, it's worth a multiple. Like if a manufacturing business that has 10% EBITDA margins is worth 7 times EBITDA, 6-7 times EBITDA. Singer's with their margins is worth mid-teens, high teens, which is consistent with where if you were to graph out, not Ferrari's a little bit higher because that brand is really pretty spectacular, but there's a case to be made that, Singer represents one of the very few luxury brands that are based in the U.S., and that was, really created in the U.S. I mean, Rob has done a great job of bringing that California car ethos, into the business, and I think his ability to create this zeitgeist of Singer is really incredible, and Maz and the team have done an amazing job of marketing it globally and trying to do it in a way that respects our partners and at the same time makes it a business that can grow and be profitable.
This may derail our whole conversation, but I'm going to ask it anyway because I'm really fascinated by what you said about, sort of mentioning and verbalizing that you had Singer on a pedestal, basically, and 2 weeks later you have an opportunity to get involved. And I remember in Barry's conversation, you mentioned a friend, I think, of your dad's when you were very young who asked what you wanted, and you told him. And in a matter of months later, you were there. You were in the Cayman Islands with a boat, making the amount of money that you had said.
Yeah.
How often does this happen to you? And what is this magic that you are seemingly able to conjure when you speak things and then the universe gives them to you?
Dude?
Yes.
It's not a superpower. Everybody has it. It's
Say more.
It's about manifesting an outcome. You just you have to be open-minded to it. There's oh God, this is going to sound super corny, but there's a really good book called The Secret. And if you haven't read it, you should read it. That's for everybody listening. I don't care how successful you are. You should read the book. And you probably, if you happen to be very successful, you're probably either very lucky or you're already, using some of these skills. I think you have to be open to, whether we call it the universe or we just call it, karma, or we call it, the coincidences of life. You have to be open to allowing these things to come into your sphere. And I think, as it relates to Singer, that was something we cared about. And sure enough, it presented itself. Racing was something that we thought would be really interesting. But we were like, okay, we're not going to go out and buy into an F1 team and pay a really high price where we own a minority stake and our capital doesn't do anything. We want to find something where we can actually make a difference. And sure enough, that ended up happening. So I do think these things can happen. It doesn't always work, and sometimes bad things happen, and you got to figure out why. And we don't always get it right. We certainly didn't get everything right in Hertz, but I think we've learned a lot from it. And as you go through life, whether you're investing or working in a different job or industry, you have to take your mistakes as a gift and learn from them and build on them and try to do better the next time you go out. And that's all we can do.
So how much of, the investment in Singer and in Revology and Yoda, those have to be different than the other, like, purely business investments you make, right? Because you love the product. It's a different...
The standard's the same.
Yeah?
The standard is we've got to make a good return. Singer will be, a good, very good investment for us. Revology will be a very good investment for us. On that topic, the reason that we pursued Revology is we felt that there was an opportunity for them to become one of the very first companies to pursue production under the FAST Act in the U.S., which is formerly known as the Small Vehicle Manufacturer Act law, which, my guess is most people are like, what the heck is that?
Yeah, please enlighten us.
So the FAST Act has now been fully, written and put into law. It is a provision that allows a small vehicle manufacturer, which is less than 5,000 units a year, to go to an original OEM and get a license for IP for a vehicle that's over 25 years old. That small vehicle manufacturer that can then reimagine and remanufacture that original car. And reimagine means exterior tolerances within 10%, which is pretty wide, pretty wide variance, and interior that can be entirely new. The only requirement is that the drivetrain must be current year emissions compliant. And if you achieve all those things, there's no safety homologation. So you can use the safety requirements of the original vehicle, and you get a new VIN. So now everyone says, "Oh, that's much lower cost than," because you could start with a carbon tub. So you could say, "I'm going to make a, 1970 Ford Bronco, start with a carbon tub." Very easy to manufacture off a carbon tub versus one of the rolling chassis that you can buy, because you have a really rigid frame. It's everything's perfectly square. The problem is you've got to go through the process of getting a current year emissions compliant drivetrain and then incorporating it into that, and then getting all the engineering right and making sure that you have a good, safe product, even though you may not have the requirements. It still needs.
And Ford could say, "No way, Jose."
Well, Ford's got to believe in you enough to allow you to do it, and I use Ford as an example. You can use any OEM with a car over 25 years old, which brings you, by the way, as scary as is to say, into the late 90s. So there's a whole plethora of really cool cars that you could do.
Well, and by the way, it's interesting that you chose the Bronco, because I know a lot of people are skeptical of these resto-mod companies because there's a whole wave of Bronco knockoff garages out there.
I'm among them.
That fall apart. And Hannah and I talk about this a lot, because I'm always like, hey, Revology is a different story, because they're building it from the ground up. They have actual engineers that used to work at Ford's special vehicle unit who are, have built their own factory in Orlando. So help us. Obviously, you're talking your book.
He wants you to convince me.
Yeah. So
yes, please convince Hannah.
I would say we have looked at a great number of, and I'm going to use the word resto-mod as a non-pejorative term to say, encaptures that whole industry.
That's good to clarify.
And just say, like, anyone that takes an old car and makes it newer, reimagines it, rebuilds it, whatever you want, however you want to describe it. They're not all created equal. And we've looked at a lot of them. And I'll say two things. One, Revology does things very differently than nearly all, not all, but nearly all of the other manufacturers out there. And they do some things that are, in fact, different than every other one of those companies. The second thing is that for all these businesses, they take a deposit from the customer, they then go build the car, there's a sequence of payments, and they deliver the car. When you take a deposit from a customer up front, it's, you put that on your balance sheet, and they count it as working capital, and they will all say, we don't have debt. Well, you don't have debt, but you have a payment that you owe, or you have a future product that you owe to the customer. It's the same thing as debt. When you deliver the customer, you've got to repay it by way of, releasing that off your balance sheet. And when we saw the huge explosion in demand for these cars post-COVID, in kind of late 20 through, early to mid 2022, demand goes through the roof. All these deposits flow in. They build the cars. Then the deposits leave the balance sheet. What happens? Well, it's like you have to repay a bunch of debt. And if you haven't planned for that release of working capital is very, very difficult to manage for a small company. And so a lot of these businesses out there are struggling to remain solvent in the context of a world where demand has shrunk, kind of coming back to trend line, which means sales for the next, over the course of the last year and probably for the next year or two will be lower than a steady state number of sales. So
it's a target-rich environment for you.
It is, but I most of these companies they're not going to make it because they haven't invested in the business and they don't have a differentiated product. So I would agree with Hannah that, for many of these companies they're really just large garages, and they've got economies of scale in the sense that they're doing the same thing over and over, but they haven't done the engineering work. Revology is in fact very, very different. And Hannah, if you were to, visit Revology, just do one simple thing: just close the door.
Oh, really?
Just close the door. I own two 1960s Mustangs. Both are original that have been restored. They're in great condition, but if you close the door of those cars and you close the door of a Revology, it's not the same thing.
I look forward to doing that.
Yeah, it's a good, and then it's, when you put it into gear, what happens? Right? You get that lurch against your brake pad. We've all driven those old cars, and that's very
especially
common.
Hannah.
Yeah, it's very common. I always joke my wife's got a 56 T-Bird, and I'm like, it's the most deadly vehicle I've ever driven. It's a complete death trap. It's got a metal steering wheel that's right about jaw high.
It makes you feel alive, though. I'm sure.
Oh, you feel very alive. That's for sure. But those are very realistic experiences that are consistent with the time that those vehicles were engineered and made. Because look, it was just a different era. Those 70-year-old cars. The Revology vehicles don't feel like that. They don't drive like that. They're not durable like that. They're modern pieces of machinery in every sense. They just look old, and that's what makes them so fantastic.
So how did you find Tom Scarpello is the guy who presents the car. He's the founder. He also presents the car on the Leno clip. And if I were doing it, I would sell it like hotcakes, But he's clearly an engineer because he's going into very minute detail of like how he created the door handle,
If you were the same Tom, is his personality. It's not the same as, say, Rob at Singer, but they're similar in the sense that they don't sell their product. The product sells the product, and they just tell you their vision. Each comes at it from a slightly different perspective. Rob is an artist and very much into the aesthetics, and Tom, is an engineer and very much into what makes his cars truly spectacular from an engineering perspective. There's lots of overlap, by the way, with each of them, and so I think.
Did you hook up with them at the same time?
No, it was later. We developed a thesis more fully that these cars that inspire passion would continue to grow in interest, and we went out looking for another company to invest in, and one that we thought we could help become the first and potentially only, fast act manufacturer. And Revology was the only one that we found that we thought had what it would take to be able to produce those vehicles.
But there's no one else. There's no one else taking advantage of that law.
There's others that will try. We didn't find anybody that we felt had everything it takes. And I don't want to, out of respect for what Revology's done, I won't say chapter and verse what it takes, but it's a lot. It's a lot of capital. It's a lot of engineering expertise, a lot of design expertise, and it is a fantastic relationship with whichever OEM you'd like to get a license agreement with. They have to believe in you. It's sort of like any business relationship. You got to make sure your counterparty is going to be there and be around. And we hope that part of what we bring to the table is the financial stability to allow the counterparts to say, okay, these guys will be here and they can do a good job, and the customers don't need to worry about the deposits.
What is in it for Ford? Obviously, there's a licensing agreement that I'm sure. Is it very lucrative? Is it a little bit lucrative? How does this benefit Ford?
I think it would be fair to say that it's very beneficial to the brand. You're celebrating, a vehicle that is decades old. Obviously, whatever vehicle they decide to do with whichever OEM they decide to do it with, you're celebrating that original vehicle in a very special way, and it brings it to a group of consumers that really aren't going to do that on their own. The person who buys a Revology Mustang, into six figures for the car, fully
almost
optioned.
300, right?
Yeah, they're not out shopping for. It's not like they're choosing that over.
It's not cannibalizing anything.
Nothing. In fact, they're more likely, to ring up their local dealer and ask for the new GT3 Mustang, which they won't get because there are none available. But I think it attaches them to a brand. They're probably more likely to go out in auction and look for, one of the last 2 generations of GT40s. I just think that, all of a sudden you say, oh, I've got this thing, and I'd like to have, the OEM's version of a great car, the kind of greatest of great cars as well. So I think it's very, very beneficial to the brand. I think it enhances the brand. I would tell you that in the case of Singer, there's been luxury brand businesses, that have taken an interest in Singer and said, there's got to be, some value here that can be unlocked. And I think that shows that you are in fact creating something that's luxury. And you
mean like Kering or LVMH is?
I just mean that I won't say anything specific.
No, I mean that's what you mean. Like,
in the realm of non-auto luxury type companies. And because whether it's watches or what have you, that say, this is something that's really interesting. And so you can think of really creative partnerships to pursue that celebrate both brands at the same time. And there's lots of that in racing and in auto, generally speaking, right? I mean, you look at the brands that are on the side of modern race cars, particularly in F1, which I think from a brand value
I was going to
perspective.
ask you about Formula One.
Yeah. I mean, F1 it's fantastic. I watch it every weekend. Like, it's not like it's a great surprise how things shake out. But I think what's great about it is that you're watching these masterful pieces of machinery. You know that you are attached to something it's about the overall experience. Like, going to an F1 race isn't really about like being glued to the race.
It's not about the racing.
No. It's about everything else that goes on there. And I happen to think that the most underappreciated racing brand in the world is WEC, World Endurance Championship, where we have an investment in one of the teams. And I'll tell you why I say that. People watch sports and they get attached to sports for 2 reasons. It's the tribalism element, where you can attach to something that makes you feel part of a community. Okay, I'll get to the tribalism in a second, what WEC has. The second is uncertainty of outcome. Okay, there is no sporting event in the world that has more uncertainty of outcome than 24 Hours of Le Mans. You don't have the slightest idea who's going to win that race. You can be 23 hours into watching it. You have no idea who's going to win. There's nothing else that goes on for that duration. Maybe cricket, but that has zero certainty on how things are going to play out. And on the tribalism side, what's happened with the new LMD and LMDH entrance is it's brought in all the OEMs. So you have the major manufacturers are getting involved and putting cars forward. You've got Ferrari, Porsche,
Ford,
Lamborghini,
Ford in the GT3 series, Lamborghini. We've got Cadillac in WEC, and the list goes on, and others that are lined up to come in that I won't name because I'm not sure whether it's public or not. But it's going to be fantastic, right? And so you've got this incredible grid. By the way, you can be a customer as we are currently, meaning you go buy a car and you hire somebody to race it for you, and you can actually get into the race. Not as a driver, but as a participant, and bring your own sponsors. And I just think it's an incredibly undervalued asset. It's coming to COTA for Labor Day weekend. I'd encourage people to check it out.
Hang on,
it's
so
pretty cool.
Is it 24 hours of COTA?
COTA's going to be 6, if I'm not mistaken.
I see. So there are some
different races, different durations.
Got it.
Yeah. So
I watch only MotoGP and sometimes Formula One, but I don't have time to devote any more than that because I'm already watching. Practice, qualifying, sprint race, but WEC.
It's only 8 races a year.
I only know Le Mans and Daytona.
Yeah, so Daytona's part of IMSA.
And Sebring, I guess, is...
And Sebring's part of IMSA. And then, but, there's a race at Spa.
Wait, so those are different than WEC?
WEC is...
Dude, it's very confusing.
I know.
To be underappreciated, maybe that's why.
So I think WEC is like international, IMSA's U.S.
Okay.
And WEC has it's one of the 3 races in the world. It's Indy, Le Mans, and Monaco. And they call that the Triple Crown, right, in racing.
I hope Monaco is more exciting in WEC form than it is in F1 form.
We don't race Monaco, but I promise you the races are more exciting than Monaco has been the last few years. But, to see a race at Spa and, the cars are, bombing around for 6 hours nonstop, so roughly 4 hours as long as an F1 race, that's pretty incredible event. And it is very special. Imola is always a special event, Fuji, Bahrain, Qatar, and Sao Paulo this year as well. So lots of really cool destinations. Obviously, Circuit of the Americas in Austin. And so you've got all those great circuits, and there will be more to come. But I think, as I said earlier, what really makes it fun to watch is the involvement of these great manufacturers. It's true sports car racing. In many cases, you can or will soon be able to buy a variant of the WEC car for the road. It won't be a hybrid, but I know at least 2 manufacturers that are going to offer the vehicles for sale.
No, hang on a second. I don't understand exactly, but don't they have like a more stock car entrant and then total prototype and then...
Yep, so there's more stock cars like the GT3 class.
Right.
So that's almost exactly what you can drive on the road. So if
you can buy the Mustang if you get
the GTD.
If Farley gives you
Farley gives you the nod. God, I love Jim Farley. I'd love to get that car. In the case of Porsche, it's the GT3 RS, which is a tough get, but it's a very special car. I mean, it's a road car with effectively DRS. That's pretty cool. And then you've got the LMH and LMDH classes, which are the hypercar class.
And that's what you guys are in.
That's what we're in, yeah.
So how do you create value out of this admittedly obscure racing series?
For Americans is the key. It's got a good follow. I mean, if you were to go to Le Mans, you would come away with a very different appreciation of just
everybody
how big
says
it is.
that. People,
yes,
I've never
but
been.
but
have you been,
I mean,
Hannah? Have you been to
no,
the,
I haven't. And
everybody
frankly,
says like it's an amazing event.
I don't want to go.
feel
No,
like I
it's
would be
not
so tired
spectator friendly.
and
It
hungover.
rains
No.
every year. It's
hold on.
grueling.
Hold on.
You camp.
Let's be honest, okay? Hannah is not going to end up at Le Mans in a tent, okay? Like that's probably not the way you're going to experience it. And the people who do that love it. But what
that is not for me.
What we do is we get like really nice RVs if you want to stay at the track.
I was going to say I could see Hannah there in like an Airstream, like
yeah,
a nice.
It's awesome.
If we
60s
work
number.
that out, then
Yeah.
I will be
you can-
happy to attend. But the fact remains, though, this is so European.
Yeah.
And really, Formula One has grown in the U.S., but it's taken years.
Because of Drive to Survive.
Well, 2 things, I think. We'll come back to that in a second. The way you do it is through promotion. And so, why do we have Brady brand on the side of our car? Because, we pick up, tens of millions of impressions every race because, Tom's involved in it. Why is Hertz involved in it? Well, because it's great content. I mean, it is really cool content. People walk through an airport and they see one of our cars sitting there. Like, that's kind of a cool thing to run into. They always attract a giant crowd. You're creating great content, great interest. We run promotions for the customers to gain access and go to Le Mans. We had a bunch of them there this year. That's a really neat thing. All of a sudden, you've got a trip across the Atlantic to watch a race. And I promise you, everybody who goes to Le Mans comes away with an incredible impression. Ask LeBron James what he thought after he went last year. I won't spoil it, but I promise you will get a good.
How long did
read.
he stay at the track?
He was there for the entirety of the first day, so
Okay, that's respectable.
Yeah. And it was, Tom's been there for the full weekend. It's a great.
You were there. Were you there a couple weeks ago?
I was. Yeah, we stayed for the whole time. Being out at the end of the Mulsanne Straight, when the cars are under heavy braking at that turn, that right-hander into one of the chicanes, and the brakes are glowing bright red. And yes, it's drizzling out, and you got a cocktail in your hand at 2 a.m. It's not the worst thing in the world.
No, you got a tall boy of Stella.
By the way, this reminds me, Tom, do you run your own Instagram?
No,
Because
well,
I saw it on your Instagram.
Yeah, I have a public Instagram that we created for the team because there's a funny story about that. I have a private Instagram. I've got like a whopping 100 followers or something, and I started getting all these follow requests. Somebody figured out I think I had been tagged in something. And so I got all these follow requests, and I got this notification from Instagram that said, your account's under review. And so I'm like, you have to give all this information, give all the information. And 15 minutes later, like, your account is permanently deleted. And I'm like, what happened? They said, you violated our community standards. And I was like, well, what does that mean? They said, well, you're impersonating a public figure. I'm like, what?
Impersonating yourself.
Yeah, I guess. Because in one city in England, I'm a public figure. So, and so I had to delete all the requests, and then we created the other account. But anyway.
The city is Birmingham, by the way, for listeners who, because you own a soccer team there.
Yeah, our firm
Knighthead
has made an investment in Knighthead, and I'm the chairman of the club, and that's a fun thing. By the way, it gets back to the same analog digital thing. It's kind of the ultimate form of analog entertainment. Is why we got into sport, and cars and racing are the same thing. Yeah, but I think that there's a lot of things that draw people into this and make it interesting. And you asked about F1. Yes, Drive to Survive had an unbelievable impact on it. But I was in a meeting, it was 2 years ago now, with an F1 team principal. We were talking about this exact topic and the rise of F1, and it was following the Goodwood Festival of Speed, where my son and I go every year. And I told him he could attend the meeting because he wanted to see this. We get to go see the whole facility. And he's sitting in the back there, and I said, don't say a word. And so we're going through the meeting, and then I said, well, I think there's one other thing that led to a rise in popularity of F1. And I said, if it's okay, I want to ask my son for his input. So I turned to him, and he looks at me and he goes, is it okay for me to speak now? I'm like, yes, it's okay for you to speak now. And I said, Jack, how many you watch F1? He said, every weekend. He watches qualifying, watches the race. I said, how many episodes of Drive to Survive have you seen? He said, 0. And I said, well, what got you into it? And he sort of sheepishly said, the game, the video game. Oh. And something occurred to me, and I'd heard him talk about this before. If you're a hockey fan, you can play street hockey or football playing. You can side lot football, your baseball, you can play wiffle ball, or, soccer, you just have anything round, right? Yeah. Racing, it's very hard to make the connection as a fan in the way that young people have become fans by playing the sport. These games are so realistic that they can. And I will tell you, having had my son with me in a car on a track in the right seat, he knows the track better than I do, and I'm the one driving. He knows my brake points better. He knows when I should be on the gas better than I can, because he's driven the circuit, let's say, 100 times to my 5, and on a sim. And even though his sim is relatively basic, his intuition for the track, even though he's not been in the seat, is pretty incredible. That connection to the sport is incredible. And I think what other race series have lost out on is the inability to develop a product that is that realistic. And they should, because gaming's not going anywhere, and it's a great way to draw fans in. And as much as you say you don't have time for another race series, we all do. We all have more time to consume these types of media. And by the way, with the rise of AI, it's going to continue to create more and more time, quote unquote, for people, which is why we'll look for more experiential things to do. So, I think, we're at the beginning stages of a continued long rise in the interest in sport broadly defined, or at least I hope that's the case given some of our investments. But, I think all this stuff is fantastic. Like, to see young people engaged in vehicles that are not the most modern, not the fastest accelerating, not the technological marvels that we get out of today's key EV makers, but but have something that's really pretty incredible is great, I think.
I'm very curious. You mentioned very briefly hybrids. Obviously, these cars racing are hybrid vehicles. Yeah. And we've talked a lot about how you're going into ICEs as things tend to move toward electric vehicles for commuting. Where do hybrids fall into that spectrum? I used to think they're a bit of a Band-Aid, a bridge toward EVs. Now it seems like maybe they're here to stay.
By the way, we both spent the weekend driving hybrids. Or last week, Hannah was in Marbella driving the new 911
GTS hybrid.
Yeah.
And I was this weekend driving the Corvette E-Ray, which I thought was amazing.
Yeah, that Corvette's amazing. That Porsche's incredible. There's lots of other great hybrids. It's a difficult technology to master, but the best manufacturers clearly are getting it right. I think hybrids are here to stay, because I think the transition to EVs is just to get all of the rolling stock converted over is going to take a long time. Is that where it's going? I do believe that that's where we will end up. It's going to be complicated by the fact that it's going to be hard to get enough electricity available, with the competing excess demand coming not just from consumers and the growth there and households, but also electric vehicles and other forms of mobility, AI, and compute power. So, there's a lot of reasons why the transition may be slower, and to the extent that it is in fact slower, hybrids play a crucial role there. They also offer a driving experience that is not as abrupt as going into an EV directly. So, for the average consumer, it's an easier way for them to get into it. And look, from a performance perspective, you get a lot. You get you still get many of the attributes of an ICE that we all love, right? The sound, the vibration, and you get the excess performance. My personal view on all of that is I think we've more or less reached the limits of performance. Yes, cars will get faster, both in acceleration and top speed. They will.
But who cares?
It doesn't really matter.
Speed has become commoditized, right? It doesn't matter if you can go 0 to 60 in 2.5 seconds, because everyone can.
My Tesla was 19, which means that when you're in an intersection, you can go 60 before you hit the other crosswalk, right? Like, you don't really need to go any faster than that.
But it's not as much fun as going 0 to 60 in 6 seconds in something from the 70s,
Maybe.
right?
In the T-Bird.
If you're well, the T-Bird, that's exciting.
11
for
seconds.
Sure. But if you're rowing through the gears and you want to get every shift right, and more importantly, if you're under heavy braking and you're getting your downshifts right, like, that's a special feeling. Not everyone cares about that. I suspect the people listening to this probably, nodding their heads in assent. That's why we drive these old cars. And there's a whole plethora of old cars that I would, love to own and drive regularly. I don't have the time to do it, but I just think it'd be fantastic. And I don't think that's going away. So I think there's a spot for all of this. And listen, it's not the worst thing in the world for these old cars to be repurposed into, and restored into vehicles that are maintained. And I say that because, why do we want to throw everything away? There's no reason for that. They can be something
Right.
that bring great joy and can be reimagined, restored, what have you.
I recently talked to at Greenwich Concours, I went to a really cool showing, and a bunch of the guys there had C2 Corvettes, and they all said, it's like driving a truck. Like, it's not a great driving experience.
Yeah.
So if someone could reimagine that
something
vehicle.
like that would be pretty amazing.
Yeah.
The one thing I'd say on the new EVs is they are actually a stepping stone to fully autonomous mobility. Like, that's really what they represent. And I know for last year and a half, there have been lots of naysayers, and the tide's turned a little bit on that. There's been some positive articles recently. But if you really doubt how close we are, get in a Tesla with the most updated beta version of the self-driving software and tell me we're not close. It's years away, not decades away, if not closer than that. And the reason that EVs play an important role is you really can't have an ICE or a hybrid that autonomously moves people. And when we get to full autonomy, that is ecologically by far the holy grail. That's the best place. It's the most efficient.
In terms of safety. I mean,
safety,
to me, that's the
efficiency.
biggest thing, because how many people die in car accidents?
Yeah,
we talk about all the other things that kill you, and car accidents are way up there near the top of the list.
Yeah, especially for young people. And so, when we move that way, we spent some time on this. There's lots of economic advantages that get unlocked if we can figure that out. AI will certainly hasten, the arrival of those things. But again, what does that do? It frees up time to do other things. If your commute time, remember, most people don't live in big urban areas like we do, and Hannah probably drives herself to work because she's LA.
Yes, I do.
So we don't, and but elsewhere in the world, people drive themselves to work, so it's lost time. I think it's 42 minutes or 50 minutes a day for the average American worker. If you are working in that time and you're productive, then you can free up time elsewhere. Maybe every Friday is off, or maybe every Friday's a half day. Well, what are you going to do with that time? Well, maybe you're restoring an old vehicle yourself, or maybe you're driving an old restored vehicle
sleep
for fun.
Because I do drive an hour and a half back and forth from Westchester.
Yep.
And on a lot of days, I'm so wiped out. I have a couple of little kids. I just want to sleep.
Yeah.
And I still have to stay awake and brave the traffic up the Major Deacon. And it's that's what I would do.
What is the biggest obstacle right now? You say we're close, Tom. Is it a technology thing? Is it a money thing? Is it a legal
regulatory
thing?
Yeah, I think that it really depends on the regulatory environment we have. It'd be foolish to say anything other than that. There's no question that the technology is safer than humans today. It's already achieved that. It's not really debatable. The cases where there's an accident make all the headlines, but we don't make front page news every time somebody dies in a car accident in the United States. And it happens, unfortunately, many, 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 many times per day. And so the Cruises of the world, the Waymos of the world, the Teslas of the world have already done better than a human. They will continue to do better than humans, and so we will have safer vehicles. The big thing that's standing in the way right now is, getting the technology to the point where it's really useful in that, those key edge cases. And then, how do you roll out that rolling stock to make it available to move people around? So it's coming. It's a good thing. I don't think we all need to be afraid of it.
The charging infrastructure is my big problem. I mean, last week I had a great time in this GMC Hummer last week, and it has like 400 miles of range, but I got it down to 0. And
quite a feat.
When I was looking for charging stations, they were all like broken or no longer on. Anyway, I think the infrastructure is what really needs to happen.
Yeah, it's got to
before
get better.
Picks up.
There's also I think again we come back to what will they actually be used for? It's the moving people from point A to point B on regular routes. So that's your commuting work. You're never going to run out of charge if you have think if you have a gas station in your home, which is really what you have when you own an EV and you install the charging hardware. So we'll get past that. The biggest hurdle, if you will, to new charging technology is the electricity infrastructure. It's not that companies aren't willing to install it; it's that they can't pull the power that they need.
Let's talk a little bit about cars that you like. Because I thought the Masters in Business that you did was really inspirational because you tell your origin story and you're not someone who was born on third base, right? You had to work to get there. And you mentioned the Corolla and you couldn't afford to get anything else. But eventually you go to, Credit Suisse, you go to Goldman Sachs, you start your own shop, and now you have the financial wherewithal to pick up a few of those things. And, it's like collecting art. It's not. Right. So what have you got that you like? And also, do you buy them as an investment or do you buy them because you just they speak to your heart? No,
I buy what I want to drive and own for a long period of time. But I haven't gone bananas in building out a collection. I've still, my holy grail cars other than Singer still on my list because it's good motivation for me. It's just the way that maybe my brain works and what causes me to be motivated. So, would I like to own a early 70s, Daytona Spider? Yeah, that's like way up the list. The car for me that was everyone kind of had their car as a teenager. And I had one car that was I thought was the greatest thing ever, ever, ever. I just thought it was the most amazing vehicle. And it passed me walking home from soccer practice one day in my hometown of Franklin, Massachusetts on Lincoln Street. And it was a Countach, and I couldn't believe I saw it. And so there were two things that I had always seen. One was the 60-minute special on the Countach, which if you haven't watched, you should watch. It was an incredible segment. I watched it so much that the VHF tape just wore out. Yeah. And the other was obviously the opening sequence in Cannonball Run. Yes. Right, which is just you see that you're like, how is that not the greatest thing ever? I remember talking to my son about favorite cars, and he's got his favorites, and I said, no, but the Countach is so special, and he's like, oh, Lamborghini, Dad, really? I'm like, yeah. And so I said, all right, well, we went to a car show, and it was an outdoor show, and we were coming up. I said, okay, there's 5 Countaches over there. And he's like, where? And I said, over here. Come on, let's walk over. And we're walking over. And he doesn't say anything for 10 seconds. We're walking. He just looks at me and he goes, okay, I get it. And I'm like, yeah. It's like a spaceship sitting there, right? Here it is, 50 plus years later, and it still looks so unbelievable. So that's one that would be incredible to own, like a, early 80s. Oh,
you haven't got one?
No.
Dude, there was a time when those were going for 30 grand.
No. I remember right after the financial crisis, really good examples were just over 100 grand. And I remember looking at someone, I'm like, I really should buy this. I've always wanted to own this car, and I don't think it's ever going to be this price again. It was by the way, could have bought a zillion things then and made more money than buying the car.
But you were, right? Uh-huh. Isn't that when you started your business?
It was when I started my business.
So you were buying things.
I was buying things, yeah. I don't know if but we didn't buy a lot of things that had tenfold returns in this period of time. But there's a lot of other cars out there. I mean, I've got, there's some great examples that I have today. I have a 718 Spider RS that I just got. It was one of the first that came into the U.S. That's a really special car. Yes. That's Porsche, I think, just hit the ball out of the park on that one because it's a great driver's car. It's not the fastest car on the road, but man, it's got to be one of the most fun. And that size, it's a great size vehicle. It's not quite as big as the new 911s are. I really love it.
So Ferrari doesn't make a car anymore with a stick. Yeah. The Corvette doesn't come with a stick anymore. Yeah. At least as far as we know, the new 911s that Hannah drove, right? None of those come with a stick.
I think a manual gearbox is coming on a higher variant.
But why do you think these extra special vehicles...
Not on the hybrid, but on the 992.2.
Well, one of the things about the Corvette that I was driving is it's so fast that I can barely keep the car out of triple digits. I'm not sure if that'd be a good excuse when I get pulled over, but I just can't. If I had a stick, it would make it much easier to drive slower. You know,
Yeah.
why do you think these super luxury brands don't put out?
I don't think there's the demand for it. I think that's why. I mean, like, there's just aren't as many people that want that, and I think that's why we see the older cars, generate such interest. I mean, you've ever driven like an early '70s Alfa Romeo? Like, those are not fast cars. Those are awesome to drive. Like the sound, the feel of the car. Those are great cars to drive. There are lots and lots of examples of great cars with manual transmissions you drive. Another one's really inexpensive. Late '80s Mazda RX-7. That's a great.
I've never driven one, but I'm
convertible.
fascinated by the engine because it's rotary. Right?
Like, that's a great.
Do you
that's a
own
great car.
one, Tom?
No, I don't. But it's on the list of things that like would be great. This is the downside of being a New York City resident.
Yes.
I got one spot in the garage for something nice, and it's stupid how much money you have to pay to like have a protected place in your garage. Someday I won't live in New York and I'll have more cars. But I think then the ones you do buy for collection, they got you because you're in New York and it's too expensive. But I think it's sort of an endless list of what would be amazing to own. There just are so many cars, and I actually think that the list of vehicles that could be reimagined, where you have all the styling and aesthetics of something old, but with the conveniences of a more modern car. And what I mean by conveniences are like you don't have to worry about it breaking down. Right, it'll run right.
But do you mean ABS, traction control?
Yeah, as long as you can turn it off. I think those are great.
But do you think that's a long list? I mean, I could think of a few.
Oh, yeah.
Obviously, the C2 Corvette is one that I think of. The Mustang you're already doing. I don't think there are really that many.
Oh, I could go through. I mean, I think you could do. I'd love to see a Lamborghini that was more reliable,
more user friendly. I can't
Maybe
imagine. I've never been in a Countach, but I bet you it's hard to get in and out and drive.
Yeah, and the wheel well's not ideal, but it's like that's a great one. That could be really, really special. Because imagine if it were carbon monocoque with carbon body, right? It just and take that motor and modern technology. You talk about something with 800 horsepower that weighs hundreds of pounds less. That's going to be a just absolutely ridiculous car. And you do bigger rims and smaller aspect ratio tires. I mean, there's a lot that could be done there. And I think the list is a mile long.
Hannah, what would you do if you could start Hannah Elliott reimagining cars? What would you?
I honestly wouldn't.
You'd keep
I'm
purist.
honestly, I mean, it's fine. I'm certainly not casting judgment, but I honestly wouldn't. It doesn't appeal to me on a personal level. It's just not my thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I totally get that too. Like I have a, there's like old late '60s Shelby Mustangs. I've got one that's been modernized, and ones that haven't are, I think, just as every bit as fun. Imagine like an old, one. Like, I'll give you an example of a car that I'd like to own that I would definitely not want to have, like a 427 Cobra. I just want the original.
Yeah, to me too. Things we all see cars on golf courses that have been over restored, that are just past the point. They're actually better now than they ever were when they came out of the factory. Yeah. And to me, I'm not interested in a hypothetical perfection that did not exist at the time, So
I just want. Yeah. So I mean, I'm with you kind of on this because I feel like there are a lot of old cars that are very unsafe to drive. There are a lot of old cars that are very slow. Like even
you say
they
that
feel
like
slower
it's a bad
than they
thing.
are. No, and like. I would love to get like an old Jag, but I know it's going to break down every week, and I know it's going to be super slow and heavy. Yeah. But I want one I love the design. I love the interior. For example, I want so desperately that Bentley that Matt Farah got, right? I've wanted for so long. I've wanted a Bentley, but every time I watch a YouTube video about someone who buys one for $30,000, they talk about how they've put $100,000 into it already and they still can't keep it running. Yeah. I wish they could do something like,
this is the great thing. Like the case can be made for both, and Hannah will say she loves that. When you get behind the wheel of an old car, it doesn't track perfectly straight. You have to pay total attention to it.
It's dysfunctional. And that's okay.
And that's all right, right? That's really cool. And I get it. Equally, I think when you take a car that's restored and it's done really well, and you can't quite, when I drive a my Singer, people don't really know what it is, particularly the DLS. They just think it's an old Porsche with a cool paint job. They don't really, like, why? It's a visible carbon car. Oh, that's kind of cool. They don't really get that it is completely different as an F1 developed.
That's something that is completely different, right? That's not.
But it doesn't look like it, and I'll tell you, driving it doesn't feel like a brand new modern car. It bears no resemblance to, like my 718 Spider. Like, they're very, very, very different driving experiences. Both awesome in their own way, but very different. And I think that's what I find alluring, is that you can, done right, you can create something that's really pretty special.
That was super nice of him to come and spend some time with us. He's got so much on the go.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
And he's so grounded and calm.
Yeah.
I'm surprised.
Really interesting kind of crossover between cars as a hobby and cars as an investment. And obviously the businesses are, he wants to make money on them, but what cool businesses to be in.
Yeah, it's obvious he's a car guy.
He did it right. All right, very cool. That's all we've got for today. What have you got? Have you got anything on in terms of, are you driving something special? I really, by the way, desperately now want to drive that Z06 because
we should trade.
I had such a good time in the E-Ray that now, and my wife was like, we need to get one of these.
Let's meet in the middle. Start driving toward each other. We'll meet in
What did you
Kansas
finally
or something.
think of the Z06? I mean, it revs high, right?
Yeah,
it
I still
screams.
have it. Yes, it's a great car. It's like everything we said last week. I definitely think it's a bit lurchy. It's not a smooth beast, and I say that having come out of a 911. So that is what I drove immediately before it. The interior is really a thing. I don't know. It's like it doesn't. I'm not bothered by the interior configuration. It makes me feel something. I just don't know what it makes me feel.
It makes me feel like I'm a fighter pilot who's on an episode of Miami Vice.
Yeah.
Like, you're in a cocoon. And anyhow, I love also that the car is relatively accessible. So, for instance, when we're talking about Ferraris, you spend time in all these, supercars. I'm never going to get in any of those. But
yes, you will.
But a lot of people can get into Corvette.
A Corvette.
Yeah.
For sure.
Which is really sweet. All right, I'm going to be driving an SL63 next week.
Oh, that'll be fun.
So I'm excited.
That'll be great
for that. So I've driven a series of these kind of roadsters or convertibles. I had the Z4. Now I was in the convertible C8, and then I'll be in the SL63, and it'll be an interesting comparison.
That's great. I think I have a Volvo drive coming up. May have a Rivian coming up. I've got a couple things I kind of need to check. It's like I'm going to have a week or two with nothing and then a staccato succession of new things. So,
all right. Well, then we have enough to talk about for next week.
Yes.
I'm Matt Miller.
I'm Hannah Elliott, and this is Bloomberg.